We continue our conversation now with author and recording artist Clarence KD McNair. And Clarence, you had the big contract. Everybody says you're the man, you got the money. Now all of a sudden, not only are you trying to figure out how do I create more music, but you're also trying to figure out how do I not lose money. And you're also realizing that the industry that you're in is fleeting. When I would teach young people broadcasting, I would tell them, if you're lucky, your career may last 5 to 10 years. So take that contract and divide it by 5 or 10 and find out how much you actually make per year. How long have you been out of the recording business itself?
Oh, wow. I've been out of the recording business 15 years now.
So that $1 million divided by 15 doesn't really amount to the amount of money that people think that you make when you're a big artist. You got to spread it out over a lot of years. So what was your plan B?
Well, and so when I came home, I had spent all of my money. So my plan B was,
okay, what was your plan A and a half?
I'll tell you, after everything happened, when I came home, I was literally in survival mode, trying to figure out what was my next move. And in that transition period, man, I just started just trying to figure it out. You know, I knew that I wasn't going back. I was not going to give up. I'm not a quitter. I'm not a person to give up when things don't work out. Yes, I had a rough transaction from being an artist to just trying to figure it out in that time period. But once I got it together, I started to pay attention to myself and get to know myself a little bit more. A lot of times, especially with artists, we get trapped in this creative space of doing music, not realizing that creative gift you can still be creative in other ways. I know a lot of musicians who was in the record business years ago, and they were not even able to keep their fans, and they just keep going in the studio. They will not use their talents in other ways. So I started to take the experiences that I had, and I started to interact and network with up and coming new talent and people who were trying to get into the record business. And I love talking to people since I was little. I just love to communicate and talk to people and help people. So I started taking those experiences and I started consulting people and share and just giving them advice. And then one referral went to another referral. And then I ended up so this is crazy. So the music business was changing, and then the reality TV world was coming in the mid 2000s. And I started getting a ton of referrals. I ended up working with the big reality stars. I ended up brokering a lot of deals for reality TV stars. I ended up doing some work with BET and a lot of the big TV networks. And I became the guy who, hey, if you want to make some things happen, you reach out to KD. He knows a lot about the business. And that's how I was able to transition over. And that took me a long way.
So you write about depression and suicide. How did you get there?
Well, just think about this. When a person has a job takes care of your family, it pays your bills, it allows you to maintain your well-being. But when you have a big dream and it's something that you think about day in and day night, no matter what it is, it could be any kind of dream. When that dream actually happens, it does something totally different that a job would do to you. It sends you on a high that's so far into space, you feel like you literally living a dream. So when you're on a high, you're in front of thousands of people performing. You know, I've met Patti LaBelle. I used to live in a building, and Luther Vandross had a apartment there in a building in Manhattan. I used to see Luther Vandross on the elevator. These were people that my mother talked about when I was growing up. Patti LaBelle. I was at an event and Patti LaBelle was so amazing. I called my mother. I said, Patti, you got to say hi to my mother. She said, sure. Got on the phone, and you start doing these things and meeting these people that you saw on TV growing up. So it's like, it's just mentally, you're already overwhelmed. So when you go from that, and then guess what? All the lights get turned off. So now you're coming all the way back down. So I entered into a dark place because I felt like I let my family down. And I felt like a failure. I had big hopes and big dreams at that time to help make sure my family was okay. And it was something that I loved. So when all of that happened, that's when I didn't know I was depressed. People around me noticed a change in my behavior and my personality. It's like, oh, you wear that same sweatsuit all the time. Or why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you doing that? And then I stopped being interested in things that I would usually be interested in. And that's when I knew I needed to get help.
We're going to take another break. And when we come back, I'm going to tell you what you and Beatles legend Ringo Starr have in common. Stay with us. We continue our conversation now with recording artist and author Clarence KD McNair. And Clarence, I was always fascinated by something that Ringo Starr said about the breakup of the Beatles. And somebody asked him, how did it feel when the Beatles broke up? And he said, it was the worst day of my life, but not for reasons people would think. He said, I lost my three best friends, but I also lost my job at the same day. And he said, the next day, I had nothing to do and nobody to talk to about it. Does that sound familiar?
Yes, very familiar. When you have creative gifts, it's like, how do I explain this? It's just, you have the ability to create. And when you have the ability to create and you're not in a place to create anymore, it's like being in jail. It's almost like being in jail. So now your talents start to work against you. Your gifts become your enemies. So now all of the things that once benefited you start to work against you. Your personality, most creative people are really, really in touch with life. We have the ability to write about different stories, and we really have the gift to connect with people. So when you're not using those gifts and those talents, it all starts to work all against you. I remember my mind would race all the time, and I realize now that those racing thoughts were a gift that I used at one point to come up with music and be able to write and be able to think quick and be able to do all of these creative things. So no, I definitely can relate to that. Once that roller coaster,
Go ahead.
once you get off that roller coaster, it's like being in jail in your mind.
So how did you pick yourself back up?
Once again, in my book, Give It One More Try,
Okay, wait a minute. I like that part. Once again, in my book, hold that title up again, because we're gonna sell some books.
Give It One More Try. It's in my book once.
There you
And
go.
So I made a decision after I went to psychologists. I spent years just trying to figure out what was wrong with me. I was having panic attacks. It was just a nightmare. And I just decided that, hey, you know what? I'm just going to really give it one more try. And I started to change my perspective on the challenges and everything that I had endured. I started to see the journey totally different. So it was the changing of my perspective. And then I started to pay attention to other people. I realized that at one point I was being extremely selfish because I constantly was like looking at myself like, oh, I should have this. This shouldn't have happened to me. I should be here. I. Everything was I. I started changing those I's into others. And I started to focus on people. And I realized that, hey, you know what? Maybe there was some learning in all of these ups and downs. Maybe there was a lesson to be learned. And maybe from that lesson that I learned, that I could share with other people so that they will possibly be able to avoid some of the mistakes that I made. And I started to find the value into helping others and share my story, not as a means to be sad, but as a way to uplift, inspire, and give people hope and give people insight and to teach and empower other people. So I started to change my perception of the entire journey. Once I really made a decision to just not give up and keep going and give it one more try. So my perspective of everything totally changed.